Peace. Peace. How's everybody doing? We hope, we pray that everybody is well and will be better. This is your brother and friend, Ishaya Yisrael of the tribe of Dan of the house of Israel. This may be, for some perhaps, an unusual timing to sit there and get into this kind of subject. But, brothers and sisters, it is nonetheless done. Done nonetheless in love and respect, first for the Creator and on a human level for our brothers and sisters. Everything I say may not be agreed with. However, I am able, for those who may disagree or no disrespect intended, want to challenge what a brother is saying. Respectfully, we can have discussion, let me say that, concerning this, not discord. Now, family, call this one here discussion with the Christian. The reason that is because it has been said for quite some time, some centuries, if you will, that Christianity and slavery, brothers and sisters, are friends, are buddies, are comrades, if you will. And in that, brothers and sisters, on this platform, we do not disagree with that. Though there are many people who practice Christianity that are very good people, very good mothers, very good fathers, very good children. Brothers and sisters, we do want to point out, no offense, that the history of Christianity and the way in which many of our people, and by our people, I mean our black people, have become Christian, brothers and sisters, is not through righteousness. It was through force. It was through terror. It was through captivity. It was through brain manipulation and mind poisoning. So, in this kind of matter, recently there was a discussion online about the matter, brothers and sisters, concerning Christianity and slavery and the role of it, and Jewish people and Judaism and the role of Jewish people within the matter of the slave trade. Brothers and sisters, we care to point out that on this platform, as in the books a brother wrote, that was not new knowledge. What I stated in books about the European Jews, one being Aaron Lopez, who was involved in the slave trade, who was named another person, Judah Benjamin, who was involved in the slave trade, is not new knowledge. Brothers and sisters, I repeated the information that I read on. So that alone shows that if I was not the first person to say it, and I have said that over 10 years ago, that it is certainly not new knowledge. So with that being said, brothers and sisters, let us pull up the PowerPoint and discuss therein, if you will. Thank you for that, family. If I can be heard well and people are in good spirits, we ask you to please type in the number 4. If I can be heard well, brothers and sisters, and people are in good spirits, we ask you to please type in the number 4. Thank you. Some of this information is going to be new to some. Some of this information is redundant to some. But nonetheless, this is information. So without any further ado, brothers and sisters, having scheduled this for 5:15 and it is now 5:25, let us pull up the PowerPoint, brothers and sisters, and deal with it in this manner. It should show up on the screen If not, let me stop the screen, then share the screen, entire screen, looking at it from this point. Thank you for that, family. And now let's pull it up. Go to the slideshow. And looking at this, family. According to this, and we're going to show what the this is as we get into this. Let us examine this. Slavery was never a white people thing. Now, most times when slavery is mentioned, the matter of the Atlantic slave trade, starting in the 15th century to the timing of the 19th century AD, is what is discussed. The meme goes on to say 4 out of every 5 slave holding Americans were Jewish. Let us look at this. Because the Jewish people themselves are white. So whether they have a Catholic, agnostic, Judaic, satanic faith, white people are white people, certainly in America. We then read, don't be fooled, know the facts. This is interesting, as in the comments below, I will address this in light of conversations I've had concerning this. So brothers and sisters, what are we talking about in this particular case? Let us look at the meme, enlarge it, and see, brothers and sisters, where this is coming from in, say, the first place. All right? We can take that part out. Now, this is something that was discussed recently online, and I would like to, not an attempt to ever disrespect anybody, but just bring this out and to discuss it, if we will. In this meme, we read that it says, slavery was never a white people thing, quote unquote, white people thing. Then they have 5 images of people and 4 with what some would say is the shield of David. Some people say the star of David on the top of one's head. 4 out of every 5 slave owning Americans were Jewish. Don't be fooled, know the facts. Now, I saw this meme on the internet. Shalom, my brother, Bergen Paris. I saw this meme on the internet, and I was like, wow, when we get the time, let's examine this kind of matter online for reference purposes. Now, having seen this, let's go back to where we were. And it says, quote, when we deal, if we will, with the laser pointer, slavery was never a white people thing. Now, Jewish people are white with a different faith than some other white people, but Catholics are white with a different faith than other people. White people who are satanic or Satanists or white people with a different faith than other white people. So your religious matter does not identify your ethnic, national, or even racial matter. So that's something we care to point out in that particular case, because in truth, a person can be Jewish today, Christian tomorrow. A person can be Jewish today and agnostic tomorrow. To my knowledge, Judaism does not promote homosexuality. Yet, many Jewish people in the state of Israel practice homosexuality, you know. So your faith and practices does not determine your race, your ethnic background, your thoughts, or so forth as far as quote unquote religious matters go, if we will, family. So let us go back to where we were and reread this. Now, most times when slavery is mentioned, the matter of the Atlantic slave trade, which the meme was talking about, starting in the 15th century, we're talking 1440, 1441. To the timing of the 19th century AD, we're talking 1860. We're talking 1888. Let's continue. Is what is discussed. The meme goes on to say 4 out of every 5 slave owning Americans were Jewish. But if we're going to say that slavery was never a white thing, how then can you show out of 5 people the dominance of it are still white people involved in such? So that right there shows a lack of understanding in that presentation matter. Let's continue. This is interesting, and in the comments below, I will address this in light of conversations I had concerning this. Let's go on, family. One of the first things that is said is, now, regarding the matter of slavery, we're going to go over some of the things that are said to us as Black people in conversations about that meme and outside of such, some of the same kind of statements. One of the first things that is said is Black people sold Black people into slavery. No one did deny that. However, the Black people selling Black people were not of the same ethnicity. Black does not become a monolith outside of the Western Hemisphere. What am I saying in that? Monolith or monolithic means that all one and the same. It's all one thing. There's no or virtually no difference. But when you deal with the terminology, say Black people, that is a broad term. There are Black people in Malaysia, ethnically. There are Black people in Vietnam, ethnically. There are Black people in the Western Hemisphere before the matter of the Atlantic slave trade, ethnically. So now we have to begin to know and understand how can such a concept even exist by saying Black people sold Black people into slavery. And yeah, there were people of color or Black, if you will, that did sell Black people into slavery. But again, not all Black people are the same ethnicity. Let's look at this. Africa, a very tribal and clique-orientated place, which is a continent, by the way, is noted by Edward Reynolds in his book, Stand the Storm, that African tribes did not sell their own people, but rather people not close to them. So when we read in that book, which you can get online, called Stand the Storm, capitalized there for emphasis. I don't mean to be yelling, but I know online capitals mean such, but I wanted to emphasize the point. Edward Reynolds wrote that Black people who were sold by Black people were not the same ethnicity, just as much as there's different races and ethnic groups and nations in Europe and East Asia among the tribes that were here prior to the European coming. So what are we pointing out in that particular case, if we will, is this. African people are not a monolithic people. There are different ethnic groups among even people out of Africa, just like anywhere else. The Swedish is not the same ethnic group of people, though all European, along with the Italians. The Italians are not the same ethnic group of people, along with the Irish, though it's in the same continent. The Vietnamese, though all in Asia, are not the same people as China, same continent. So in Africa, which is a continent, the same applies. There are different ethnic and tribal groups within it. So this is something, again, we care to point out for reference purposes. The argument of who sold who in a way to not make white America look bad becomes moot, because after the captives were brought to the Western Hemisphere, they were sold on auction blocks to the highest bidder. So here we see, according to white logic, that Black people sold Black people who were then shipped against their will to a place unknown to Black people, then in truth resold. So the captives were sold twice? Question. That alone should tell a logical human being to never try to use the black people so black people as a tactic to silence black people to speak on the matter of slavery. What are we saying with that is this. Yes, there were people of color, black people, who did so black people, as discussed. Brothers and sisters. Now, after the people were brought over against their will to the Western Hemisphere, brothers and sisters, what am I saying? These same captives were sold on auction blocks as shown in the movie Roots by people who were not black to white people. So the captives were sold twice. So what white people who keep on saying in so many words, when you get down to the truth and history, are saying without maybe acknowledging or realizing it is this. We white people participated as an accessory after the fact of the people being kidnapped by other black people. Then we partook of the ill-gotten gains, the human beings that were sold to us, and then we shipped them against their will, making them captives. And then after that, we put tar on them because their bones were showing because of being on their side or on their back for X amount of weeks at a time, being malnourished and things of that kind of nature. And then after that, what we did was sold them on auction blocks throughout the Caribbean, throughout Brazil, throughout the southern United States, throughout the northern United States, such as what the Dutch did in New Amsterdam, such as what was done as shown in the movie Amistad by the people of Portugal and Spain and Cuba, such as was done in Louisiana, shown in the movie Mandingo, brothers and sisters. So you should not try to use as a catalyst black people sold black people. Because when you get to the history of it, white man, you sold the people who were sold. So if selling people are wrong, you participated in that wrong. But the reason why you're saying it, and it's not to be offensive, is only a hit dog barks. So because it hit you, because it made you feel a way, instead of saying something, not trying to sound like a coon to myself, that was dumb, we can learn from that, let's not do that again, let's all get along. That's not the point and premise many online and offline are even talking about today. It is black people sold black people. And you guys got to sit there and admit that, or you're going to sit there and be called a racist. Don't tell me how to sit there and talk and what to talk about. You want to sit there and because you didn't expect somebody to think logically, to think meticulously, which you now want to sit there and call, that's being racist. Stating a fact doesn't make you racist, and if it does, then that's your poor definition of the word racist. So let's continue in this family. Another matter addressed in the comments, at times when speaking on slavery in the Western Hemisphere, we see the gentleman Anthony Johnson mentioned. This was also spoken on the platform Moreh Yeshaya History Lessons some years ago. You could type in or Moreh Yeshaya History Lessons. Thank you again, Brother Bergen Paris, for typing in the info. That is, Anthony Johnson is not the pioneer of American slavery. You can sit there and type that under Moreh Yeshaya History Lessons, and that video will come up. The person they are speaking of was a black man who had to go to court to get John Castor, his slave, to be a permanent slave. Who gave Anthony Johnson the permission to be a permanent slave holder? The Court of Virginia in the 17th century. We should remember that Virginia was a colony since 1607, meaning a British colony. Shalom, Beit Zadok. Things are well. How are you doing? Thank you for joining on. The record we see of the Dutch man of war bringing 20 Negroes to Virginia in 1619 predate the matter of Anthony Johnson, which was in the 1650s. What made John Pope comfortable to bring captives to Virginia, being a Dutch man to an English colony in 1619? That's another question. Well, the governor of Virginia at that time, George Yardley, received 15 of those 20 captives. The Dutch brought a group of captives that was accepted by the governor of a colony. Yes, the captives, 15, were permanent slaves to Yardley, George Yardley, and he passed away in 1627. If the matter with Anthony Johnson was after 1630, how can he, Johnson, be the pioneer of American slavery? This culminates to the idea that black people do not study and reason. How did a black man get the name Johnson? Now, for those who bought my book, thank you for buying it. Certainly the history ones, you would sit there and see it's pen named author Vincent Hutchinson. That is in honor, may he rest in peace, of my father. How did we get names like Hutchinson? How did we get names like Johnson? How did we get names like these, brothers and sisters? So when you find sometimes people saying, well, you know, there were even black people and white people as slaves, I'm going to need you to show me a group of white people that have ethnic or surnames that ethnically, I may say, go back to the East. See, because now if you can show me, like we can trace Hutchinson to the British or the English, you can trace many of your last names to the Portuguese, to the French, to the Spanish, to the Dutch, to the English/British. So when people begin to sit there and say, because people name their captives the names of the language of the captors. In the Bible, it talks about that in the book of Daniel. He got the name Belshazzar, Mishael, Hanael, and Azariah, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So even in the Bible, where the prophet Daniel is mentioned, he got a name that was not ethnically of his. Name as stated Belshazzar. So what are we pointing out in that particular matter is this, brothers and sisters. I want to say I'll have new equipment, family. So Bergen Paris and Beit Zadok, I'm asking you and anybody else, if you can hear me well, please type in the number 4. I'm using a different computer basically, as well as a new microphone. I got new equipment to try to sit there and upgrade the platform. So if I can be heard well, please let me know. Let me know the sound quality definitely is appreciated. So now, as we get back into this matter right here, family, is this. To the people who say that, yes, there were black people who had white people as slaves. And we know that captives are given names by their captors. This is how you get Anthony Johnson. He's called in the Portuguese record Antonio the Negro. Thank you for that, Bergen Paris. So if that is the case, we have to sit back and truly wonder, were there black people who were slave masters over white people, and can such be traced to this day? Were there black people in history who did wrong by white people? Yes. But you will find in discussing this kind of matter online or offline, certainly online, people I've noticed will try to sit there and control the narrative, tell you what to talk about, tell you what not to talk about, sit there and try to throw little silly insults by saying, if you don't talk about that, then that means, yeah, but we're not your slaves no more. So you talking about, oh, you're a racist. Oh, you shouldn't talk about that. You should talk about this. Many of us may or may not have parents. Like I personally don't. Both my parents are deceased. And it's not to sound haughty or arrogant or belligerent, but at 46 years old, I speak my own mind and take the wisdom from my elders that are still here, such as how to present yourself in front of the entire world on the internet intelligently. But you do not tell any grown man or woman what to and what not to say because it hurts your feelings. Get out of your feelings. So George Yardley passed away before the matter of Anthony Johnson in the court. How can Anthony Johnson be the pioneer once we understand the definition of the word pioneer? To be the first at doing something is what a pioneer is. So if he, Anthony Johnson, according to what we're going to see here in this, was the pioneer of American slavery, how can that be brothers and sisters, having the name Johnson, which is certainly not traced back ethnically to any black man, linguistically. See, these are things not to be haughty when people think you don't think or think you don't know anything or that you should, or basically you should not know anything. How dare you begin to sit back and think like that? So now you're going to have to be called racist. So now you're going to have to sit there and have to answer to that in that particular case. I recently was asked, do you know who the first, excuse me, do you know who the first slave master was and who owned the first slaves in America? I figured that white guy, not to be racial, was going to sit there and go to the Anthony Johnson thing, as many of them have, even online. So I call myself in my way beating that person to it. And I said, I heard some years ago about this Anthony Johnson thing and spoke on it. The person did not respond back to that. See, when you're trying to wiggle out of something and when you're trying to sit there and evade something, and when you got to sit there and say other people are using matters of a point to be made and don't want to sit there and focus on something, and you throw transference, you have an agenda, and that's what you're saying, what you're saying. No, you have an agenda, and you didn't expect to be questioned by anybody. But let's look at this again. The first slave owner in America was not only a black man, he went to court and demanded it. In 1654, it was time for Anthony to release John Kesa, a black indentured servant. Instead, Anthony told Kesa he was extending his time. Kesa left and became employed by the free white man Robert Parker. Anthony Johnson sued Robert Parker in a Northampton court in 1654. In 1655, the court ruled that Anthony Johnson could hold John Kesa indefinitely. The court gave judicial sanction for blacks to own a slave of their own race. Thus, Kesa became the first permanent slave and Johnson the first slave owner. That's where you're messed up. Because see, when you're trying to present foolishness, you slip up. We have to ask, who in the Virginia court in the middle of the 17th century gave Anthony Johnson the permission to have anybody as a permanent slave? Were those judges that were in that court black? Were they coons? So when we read right here, brothers and sisters, in this silly meme, and many memes are silly because you don't have to do fact check and so forth, and you don't have to do logic and reasoning. In 1655, the court ruled that Anthony Johnson could hold John Kesa indefinitely. This is the line where they really messed up. The court gave judicial sanction for blacks to own a slave of their own race. What color, if we're dealing with black as a color, were the people who allowed Anthony Johnson to do so? And why would they do it and not be part of the pioneers of American slavery? Oops. This culminates to the idea that black people do not study and reason. How did a black man get the name Johnson? The meme that circulates that we just showed about that shows not that of Anthony Johnson, but rather that of Lewis Hayden. That's not Anthony Johnson in the picture. So what they did was just tag up some black man who lived over 100, 200 years after in the 19th century named Lewis Hayden and put that picture there with some words that historically don't make any sense. So the picture is off. The wording shows it to not be historically correct. And the wording, when you're trying to present a lie, have you trapped up within it. You didn't think that far because you didn't think black people were going to read into certain things and reason out certain things. You believed the kind of stuff you seen in Django, where the Caucasian guy is up there saying that their brain is better than that of the black people's, that they are smarter than, quote, the Negro. And of course, the word Negro wasn't even used that much in that movie Django. They teach their children this. And if they don't teach it, then how do you get a Dylan Roof doing what he did at the age in which he did it? Let's continue. Slavery was never a white people thing, according to the meme that we showed earlier. In a debate with Abraham Lincoln and Stephen Douglas in the 1850s, the latter spoke about what was meant when a statement saying all men were created equal was not that of the Negro or, quote, savage Indian, but of white men. This was in the 19th century, in the 1850s. The same era, Alexander Stephens, the vice president of the Confederacy, stated slavery is the cornerstone of our republic edifice. James Hammond, a politician from South Carolina, stated, speaking to the Senate, no one dare make war on cotton. So from James Hammond, as mentioned here, Alexander Stephens, and Stephen Douglas, these are powerful people in the government of the United States in the 19th century. And why do I mention that? Because there's another lie that people were saying. When I was in college over 20 years ago, the theme about slavery in Black history classes was that only 5% of white people in the South owned slaves. 20-something years later, online, people are saying less than 2% of the white population were slave owners in the Southern United States. So within 20 years, meme scholarship is saying less than 2% of white people were slaveholders in the Southern United States during the time of slavery. But if that was the case, or even the case of saying that it was only 5% of white people in the South owning slaves, why then would anywhere within a 20-year span of me being a college student, this timing now, from 2021 2001, when I first entered college, not to get too personal, graduating in 2013, and now the year is 2026. So say within a little over 20 years, the percentage of said white people in the Southern United States, as far as being slaveholders, has gone from 5% to less than 2%. Because see, the idea is to eradicate white people's guilt from the slave trade and slavery. So this is why over the course of years, you might even see it dwindle a little here and a little there. That is why we want to talk about these kind of names. Stephen Douglas, a politician. Alexander Stephens, a politician. James Hammond. If it was even 5%, why are these three powerful government position holding men fighting for what they just have as 5% in the first place? It makes no sense. But you have to remember, they think they're dealing with a people that don't think sensibly. So it's okay to just run shot and tell the black man anything. He's more worried, and I say this in no offense, according to some people's thought, sports and women and entertainment and sports. And I'm not knocking sports. I am a very, for what you may call, big fan of the Detroit Pistons. Always have been. I'm a very big fan of, well, maybe not too recently, the Denver Broncos, the football team. So I'm not here to sit there and knock sports or entertainment. What I am saying is that is the thought of us, 2 months of us as a people. So when we start talking about Alexander Stevens and Stephen Douglas, and when we start talking about James Hammond, that was never supposed to be coming out the mouth of a Negro. While loving sports, you were supposed to talk about Magic and Jordan and Pippen and Rodman and Darryl Strawberry and the Negro League. And if you don't go into history, you're supposed to talk about the Brooklyn Bombers, which is nothing bad with it, but you want to pump us with that to avoid this kind of matter, and that's the problem. But let's continue, family. Cotton was if not the, main export the southern United States had to offer the world. It was, if not the, main income supplier for the economy of the South. So people like Isaac Franklin and John Armsfield in Louisiana, and like John Hawkins and George Washington, all different centuries, all had a common practice: slave trading and enslavement. So again, we have John Armsfield and his buddy Isaac Franklin. They were slave traders big time in New Orleans, in Louisiana. But we want to believe that it was less than 5%. But meanwhile, they building whole empires on this and shipping the cotton out to as far as England and East India. Did you know that? That the cotton that the black people picked in the southern United States was shipped to East India? Don't come with the story of saying 1.6% of the people in the South were slaveholders. Because you're not going to find in the Confederacy then white woman fighting on behalf of her man, portraying a male herself for something that didn't mean something to their spirit. The fact that there were white women portraying themselves as males to fight on behalf of the Confederacy shows the story anywhere between 1.6% and 5% of white Southern people being the slaveholders is a myth. They went too hard. They were, in today's terminology, too beast for that percentage to be those numbers. Mary Surratt has been known for saying, Mary Surratt was the mother of John Surratt. John Surratt was the friend of John Wilkes Booth. John Wilkes Booth is the assassinator of Lincoln. And John Wilkes Booth said African slavery is the greatest thing that can be known to man. And John Wilkes Booth, if the story given of him is true, did not live to be 30 years old. So who taught him that? Some people say that he lived to be over 50, 60 years old. And some people say that he died in a tobacco farm area in Virginia. That story is whether he fled from the barn, that's his life, or whatever in that particular case. Did he die in 1903, some people said, or did he die in 1865? Some people said. But one thing we know about him is that he was a promoter of slavery and deeply into, quote, the Confederate cause. And he took upon himself, or some people said the banks were behind it, and he assassinated the 16th president of the United States for something that an economy that they are now trying to say was less than 10% of people in the South. That is madness. You're not going to find conspirators, knowing that if they get caught with John Surratt and the others, and Mary Surratt basically saying, this is what the cause is for, it's worth it. I'm not telling you where my son is at. If you were to read about her and watch the movie, if you're into it, called The Conspirator, you get those kind of matters. So what are these memes and people talking about? Let's continue, family. At times, white people say that the white people ended slavery as a means to make black people be quiet on the subject. Yet, should they who are guilty of such an atrocity, when ceasing from it, be commended by the victims? So, if I can talk about the slave names that we walk around with today, you want to say white people ended it. You started it. So, do you want a biscuit? If you are white and never was a slave master, my comments should not even make you respond to it with a quote defensive mind. If I should not quote complain about such because I personally was not a slave, then you should not complain to me about my complaint if you were never a slave master. It wasn't me and it wasn't my family and we never did that. So why are you trying to guide me on what to talk about something that you personally have nothing to do with? You jump into somebody else's business? You trying to tell somebody else what to and what not to talk about? These people I conversed with, which led me to the spirit to bring this out, are Christians. No offense to the good ones. Were there Jewish people who were involved in the slave trade? Yes. Were there 600,000 Christians fighting to end slavery in the West? That's another comment that's made. 600,000 Christians, 600,000 white people, 600,000 white Christians fought to end slavery. No. Was Lincoln a transparent person about abolishing slavery? Yes. Now, some people may disagree with what I just said. Let me explain why I say such. He stated that if he could accept the seceded states back with or without slavery, he would do so. So he was transparent. Lincoln could care less about the freedom of the black man, woman, and child. In places like New York, New Jersey, and so on, the Civil War, and so on. Pardon me, I stand corrected. I skipped a line, my fault. In places like New York, New Jersey, and so on, there was slavery. These northern states became in time free. And in the Civil War, they represented the Union. 4 of the northern states during the Civil War, meaning 4 of the states fighting for behalf of the Union, Delaware, Maryland, Missouri, and Kentucky, were slave holding states. They called them the border states during the Civil War, fighting on behalf of the Union against the Confederacy, while still being slavery holding states, were Delaware, Maryland, Missouri, and Kentucky. The fact that the black man was not allowed to fight for the Union Army, said to be fighting for him by some, online and offline, which was 2 years after the war started. This means the defeat of the Union Army at places like Bull Run, where the Union lost, did not make the Union consider putting the black man in his army. Because when the Civil War started, and places like the Battle of Manassas and Chancellorsville and things of that nature, the North was losing. But while losing to the Confederacy, the North still did not think, let's get the Negroes and put them in there. You know who pushed for that? Frederick Douglass, a friend of Lincoln. Frederick Douglass is the one that told Lincoln, you need to get the Negroes, the black people, to sit there and fight on behalf of the Union. Now, if the North was fighting, according to some people, to end slavery, then why will it take 2 years to be even convinced, after losing battle after battle after battle, after Lincoln had to replace general after general after general, in the drama that happened between Lincoln and McClellan? Why did all of that have to happen between white on white, North and South, between white and white, North and North, Lincoln and his generals, and the drama that happened between them? And it took over 2 years for them to even consider to put the black man to fight on their behalf. If you was fighting for the black man's behalf, it's because you was not. See, we're not supposed to, as a people, ask these questions. We in the West are supposed to accept that there was a black president finally, and then talk about Islam and the Muslims and the slave trade and sub-Saharan Africa, where Christianity is still rife in Africa. But you want to sit there and say that the white Christians into slavery everywhere they went. So if that's the case, then why there's still slavery in places that Christianity is popular in? If you bringing Christianity was a civilization to the world, if it was good for the world, because see, the word civilization comes from the Latin root word civilis, which means city, C-I-T-Y. You understand? Now, you notice in all this, a brother did not say there were no people who were looking or were black that didn't do wrong. Most definitely. Sadly, but definitely. There were black women that were raped by black men, all in slavery, you know. Did you know that? Black females who were slaves, sadly, were sexually assaulted, or SA, they want us to say online, by black males who were also slaves, as well as the overseer, as well as the slave master. She had no friends in that manner. So, brothers and sisters, when we sit back and we get into, say, this kind of matter, is the equivalent connection in speaking about history with black and white people is when black people are wicked, when they are the ones doing SA, when they are the ones that are the crooks. And then people want to say today, America does not have slavery today, but other places in the world, in the Middle East and in Africa, there's still slavery. If slavery does not exist in America, then you must have missed when Pam Bondi, who was working for Trump, could not turn her head to the right and look at the victims of Epstein. When Jasmine Crockett was getting at her in the congressional meeting some months ago. The victims of Jeffrey Epstein that came from the United States and other parts were lined up on the wall. And Pam Bondi could not bear to look to her right to even look at them. R. Kelly said after what he did with sex trafficking, that was his brother on the tape. So he's willing to throw, quote, his blood brother off, throw him under the bus. But people are saying, knowing what R. Kelly did, knowing about the Epstein files, that good old USA does not have slavery. But we can acknowledge that during slavery, women were treated like the way R. Kelly treated women, like the way the Epstein files speak about how women were being treated. So it does exist. Just because you lock them up, just because it's not on the books as legal, doesn't mean it does not exist. But you forgot that part, because the Jeffrey Epstein victims don't mean nothing to you. It's not that the victims of the jihad of the Islamic move doesn't mean nothing to us. It's the fact that the victims of R. Kelly don't mean anything to you. That's where it boils down to at. So just as much as the SA or the sexual assault that was done to women in slavery, so after the year 1900, 1950, the year 2000, women were being sex trafficked back and forth and forth and back. Just like they were then. Like Sally Hemings during the time of Jefferson, the third president. So it still exists. Sadly. Let's continue, family. People like Candace Owens, who recently was speaking on Jewish people, not Christian people, were the enslavers of black people. She recently was online saying it was really Jewish people, not Christians or Catholics, because she bounced from Christianity and Catholicism, the same basic faith when you get right down essentially to it. You understand? She went online recently and said that. But those who study, we been knew about the European Jewish enslavement involvement. Yet, in the plea that was made to Charles V of Spain, which prompted what became known as the asiento, the Spanish word meaning seat, the captives were to be taught the Catholic faith. The dating of the asiento under Charles V of Spain is dated to 1518. In 1685, under the Black Code of King Louis XIV of France, Black people were to be taught the Catholic religion. In the comments, because this is a discussion, I spoke of the matter of John Hawkins, who used the matter of the asiento that was given by Charles V to have captives brought to the Western Hemisphere as captives. All these people from Charles V, two others here mentioned, were white. Slavery was never a white people thing. See, because when we go back here and look at this, right? This says slavery was never a white people thing. But we done mentioned John Hawkins. He wasn't Jewish. We done mentioned Charles V. He wasn't Jewish. We sat there and we talked about Anthony Johnson. Were those judges that gave him the sanction Jewish? Who knows? Nathan Forrest in 1866, the year after the Confederacy lost the Civil War, started the KKK, the Ku Klux Klan. One of the reasons is because they, the defeated South, thought the blacks will want to seek revenge and fight. So they, in 1866, and then again in 1915, started and restarted the KKK in Tennessee and Georgia, respectively. Jewish people are not liked by the KKK. If the KKK was originally started by they of the Confederacy, the side that lost the Civil War, how and why will they start an organization that is anti-Jewish? So some people may say it was the Rothschilds who were Jewish. But the Atlantic slave trade started before the Rothschilds came to power in history. So again, who started it? See, they didn't expect people to read, to analyze. They just throw the word racist and oh yeah, I don't want to be a racist. That story ain't working on us no more, man. No more, no disrespect intended. Then if you love your mom, you will love all black women. No, I don't hate no sisters. But being that I already had a mother and I'm not looking for another, the love that I have for mommy or had for mommy and still have love for her memory does not equate to the love that I would have for my lady. And unless, no disrespect, not to get sidetracked, sisters are looking for a man to be her son. Why are they trying to come at us as if you loved your mom, you would love me? But unless, like I said, you looking for a son, that shouldn't even be part of the conversation to even mix it. Just the same, white people, if you are not guilty of the Atlantic slave trade, this kind of thing right there should be like, yeah. But yet you want to throw defensive temper tantrums, perhaps, and sit there and say, you're a racist, and you need to stop talking that kind of stuff. See, when they say do research, they didn't expect a Negro to sit there and read books. And for those who do know, write books. You're, again, like I love sports, I'm saying, you were supposed to keep talking about Jordan and the dunk. You were supposed to talk, and I say this in no disrespect, not only because a brother came out of New York. You're supposed to talk about how John Starks dunked on Jordan and the Bulls still beat their butt. Nothing wrong with sports and entertainment and fun. But even in that, you got to be serious about it. Because everyone who goes for the sports don't make it. So even in playing a game, you got to be serious even about that physical game. So when do we have time to party but so much? Play games but so much? We don't. Let's continue, fam. The KKK originally were people who were former slave masters. Does the meme make sense? Meme we talking about is what we showed earlier. Slavery was never a white people thing. Woo! Made some feel good. Now you got to explain the Jewish people you're talking about being white that you said was the dominant ones in it. Yeah, it was them. Then you telling the people who were victims of said these European Jewish slave masters, don't even talk about it because you're racist. So you got Christians like Candace Owens and them saying it wasn't white Christians that were the heavy slave masters, but the Jewish people. And then you got people telling the victims of the Atlantic slave trade and slavery in the Western Hemisphere, don't even talk about it. So only the white Christians can talk about the Jewish people being guilty of it, but the victims are supposed to be quiet? Ridiculous. Information on this I'm only human, made a typo, not came, but can information on this can be found in books online like Slavery and the Making of America by Horton, The Story of the American People by Paul Johnson, Black Rebellion by Dr. Susan Dass, From Assyria to America by Vincent Hutchinson, They Were Her Property Too by Stephanie E. Jones Rogers, a very good book, The Slave Trade by Hugh Thomas. These and other books actually do not attempt to make the current white, black, Jewish, African people of the past look bad. So brothers and sisters, as in looking at this here for reference purposes, if we will, right? This again is something we care to have brought out for reference purposes. Thank you, my brother, for typing these in. For those who are interested, not sure who is online, thankful for able to get in new equipment to sit there and try to make the presentations better. I'm open to constructive criticism, family. All right. So subscribe to the channel, comment, like, and share. We intend, brothers and sisters, to do more presentations. Thank you for that.
They think only of the Negroes in the United States. But they don't realize that 2/3 of Brazil consists of people of African blood, which means they're also Afro-American because Brazil is in South America. And in all of these, many of these countries in South America and Central America, and even in Canada, they are heavily populated with people whose ancestors came from Africa. So when you total up the number of Afro-Americans, real Afro-Americans, in the Western Hemisphere, there are perhaps 100 million. And if these people ever unite among themselves, not only is it necessary for the Afro-Americans in the United States to be organized, but it's also necessary for the Afro-Americans in the Caribbean, or the Afro-Cubans, the Afro-Brazilians. It's necessary for all of them to be organized. And then once they're organized in each place, we have to organize among ourselves so that the Afro-American in the United States will be working in conjunction in a coordinated program with those who are in Cuba, and those in Brazil, and those in Venezuela, and those throughout the Caribbean, and Haiti, and in the West Indian Islands. And in this way, we actually get strength. And it's not an accident that there's no organization existing in the Western Hemisphere that's designed toward that end. It would be it would be a direct threat to imperialism as it really exists, and to colonialism as it exists in the West. And one of the things that's going to help to bring this about is the independence of Africa. One of the only reasons that we in the West have never organized, we have hated our image and our African image. And because Africa has been in the hands of people who have created an image of Africa that's negative and hateful. And it has been hateful to us. We haven't wanted to identify with it. But now that Africa is getting independent and in a position to create its own image, and it's a positive image, those of us in the West look at the African image and see how positive it is. We begin to identify with it. We become proud of Africa, and we become proud of our African blood, our African heritage. And this is what is beginning to make the Africans in the Western Hemisphere today develop more race pride. And as this race pride develops, then it has the tendency to make us want to unite together and work together. And your Western imperialists and colonialists consider this to be a grave threat. More threat than communism or Marxism or socialism or anything else. The Africanism is what they consider to be the real threat.